Welcome back, ladies and gents, to Rebuilding Vyazma Part 3. Now, this has been a bit of a slow project for me, and it's taken me a little while to get onto this because not only has it been my holiday, I've had other projects that I've been working on, and I'd like this one to be a bit of a slow burner. Because I intend to get about 6 parts of this video series out, I can't go at my normal pace. For those who do know me, it will usually take me around about a week or two to create a map. And if I rushed ahead and recorded videos in the time I've got, I'd be releasing the map, or re-releasing it I should say, before the videos are ready. So I'm going to go a little bit slower so that you can hopefully follow along with me, and there'll be other projects out in the meantime. Now, going back over what's changed since the last update, as I said, progress has been a bit slow. All the marshes and the mud over here is now done. The HQ sector over here needs finishing, but we've done some more clearing around here. The roadways and the HQ areas in here are looking a bit clearer as well, but again, still not done. This area in front of the bases needs finishing off. But the roadway here and the field is what I've been working on for the most part, because this is an area that I hated the appearance of. Even when I built this the first time, this was the weakest area by far. So I've cleared as much out as I possibly can. Now, the main topic of this video is going to be mud. Mud is still quite a bit of an enigma to some people from a lot of the questions that I get. And while snow is easier to use, mud is difficult to pull off well. So, if you are anything, if you have any interests, I should say, in balance and the fairness of the game, you'd think it's probably a bit odd for me to have mud so close to HQ. In fact, the same over here as well. But the trick with this is that it's not proper mud. So if I go onto the overlay button, which is up here, bear in mind there's 2 similar looking buttons next to each other. This one will show whether or not mud is there, so it will raise and lower the mud levels, as you can see that example in the riverbed. Keep that on, I'd recommend. And the next one is to actually show you how much mud there is. And again, if you're used to using snow or mud, this will seem a bit odd. Now, in one of my former videos for the tips of the week, I showed you how to use snow properly. I did snow on, if I can remember the name, Karelia in Finland. And that used a lot of deep snow. In this one, I don't intend to use as much. Most of the map is covered in yellow deep levels of mud, and over here we have red. The idea with this is that the red ones will have slowing effects, so vehicles will be exceptionally slow in it and infantry will struggle to retreat from it, whereas the yellow won't cause any effect whatsoever. In fact, try it for yourself on one of your own maps and see how much of a difference it makes. Now, there are occasions when hovering over this mud will still give you the icon, but it'll only leave tracks or footprints behind. It won't actually cause a slowing effect. So this is great for visual maps. It's great for leaving what looks like deep mud, but isn't. Whereas over here, where it's more waterlogged, it's going to be a much deeper, much more dangerous area to go through. Similarly, over here where it's the river crossing, you want it to cause more problems here than, say, further down the road. So that means that, in comparison to what it used to be, this entire bottom half area of the map is actually usable now. It used to be that this entire roadway, the forest and the fields was all mud, and nobody ever went near this area of the map because it was unplayable. Now, the easiest crossings to get from one base to the other are muddy, and everywhere in between is safe, which means that AI and other players are far more likely to take indirect routes through the forest along the riverbed to try and get their infantry into combat safer, whereas here they are dead zones. Now, I want to show you how I've done this because, again, some people might not know how to do it yet. So, whenever you go onto the height map tool and you edit the top layer, it will use whatever settings you have in your atmosphere settings. And I've shown you before that I am using an iteration of one of Relic's settings. if I go on to Open Atmosphere and DLC, it should be Hill 331. All I've done slightly after that is rotate the sunlight a bit and drop the sun so it's closer to the horizon to add more shadows. But the mud is almost exactly the same. And I'd recommend that atmosphere settings for anyone. It's a great one to start with if you want a mud map. Now, what you'll find is that whenever you use the edit top layer, you can put feather on. I know in Relics maps they don't. But you don't need much strength at all. If I put a new clump of mud over here, it's at the maximum depth immediately. I click it once and it's already maxed out. So if you do, say, a strength of 1, you actually get more of an ability to tell it when to stop, adding more to it. And you get a nice, softer edge on it. But, honestly, when it comes down to it, mud should only be placed in 2 layers anyway, and you shouldn't need the additive tool. Instead, apart from the first time of course, do 1 patch somewhere on your map which is yellow, and 1 patch somewhere which is red. And just click the sample tool on top of whatever you want, and from there on it will paint at that same height. So you want one which is the largest depth you can possibly get, and one which is really shallow. The shallow one you can use for roadways that aren't integral, and for the red one, use it on anywhere where there's going to be a major conflict, to try and turn people away from using it very often. On Relic's map, Hill 331, you only ever saw deep mud on the roadways around the edge of the map where there were fuel points. So the idea with that is that it's making you fight for the better resources. It makes it a lot more difficult. So, I also wanted to show you how to get this water effect. Now this is another thing that Relic have used in their maps. When vehicles drive through mud and leave tracks behind, water at the right height will go into those tracks. So having a river or having a water source nearby mud is great. It looks fantastic. Later on in the battle, when you're fighting in this area, the river itself and the water will start coursing into all the vehicle tracks, and it will start looking a lot more realistic. But this only works if you do it properly. What I've used here, if I get the splat tool up, is one particular splat, and it's easy to find. It's called Mud Wet Eastern. And if I copy it over here, it's got puddles and ridges and looks very, very good with the right lighting effects. It gives some fantastic shadows off. When you want to do a river like this, if ever you do, that is the one texture that you should really need. Now what I'm going to do is revert this river back to how it was before I finished it, so I can show you how you add water puddles into it and what will make it look a lot better in game. So I'm going to sample the top and... oh, I forgot about that. Okay, so I've just fallen into my own little trap here, which I should have really expected. The gaps in this mud aren't lower levels of mud. If I get rid of the water layer and go back on the overlay tool, despite the fact that there are holes in the mud where water's gone in, all of the mud is the exact same layer. But some of it is in deeper water than elsewhere. So whenever you come to do this kind of thing for yourself, what you should instead be doing is making sure that you have an entirely smooth area. So if I go off the edit top layer and smooth the entire thing down, this is what it will be like before you put mud in. You then want to get a sample tool and make sure all the mud is maximum level. So it's all exactly the same. Oh, that's wrong. There you go. So that is all red, that's all the deepest layer possible. All you have to do now is get off the edit top layer and start reducing. So you want one button on the height map tool to be subtractive and one to be smoothing. You want a nice small brush. I think about 3 will be right. Strength maybe around 7. Not too much, but feather at full. And here you've got to make sure that you are reducing the bottom layer. Don't edit the top layer. If you do that, then you'll get patches of deep and shallow mud, and vehicles or infantry will all of a sudden pick up speed as they go into deeper water, which makes no sense. So you only edit the bottom layer, and just by subtracting a little bit, you can start filling in the gaps with water. Now you may come across something which I expect I will also see at some point, where the water won't update. And I can't tell you why this happens, but I can tell you how to get around it. So keep on subtracting, following all the puddles that are in the texture. And if you go back and have a look at the overlay again, get rid of the water by pressing Ctrl W, and the mud is still all there. Instead, it's just got a little bit of water in it. So do this all the way across whatever river crossing you might have. You can choose not to fill some in, but I tend to do most of them. Just because it looks better, to be fair. Now you may find, especially in this case, that if you're going to be really, really nitpicky, the puddles are probably a bit too deep. Now, you'll never find any problems with impasse when it comes to this, because again, you aren't changing the depth of the mud, you're changing the depth of the land. You should never have some impasse problems. It should still be plain sailing all the way across. If they look too deep, just go and check. Remember, it's Control Shift F5, and it will tell you whether or not it's impassable. This one particular bit is impassable. Press it again, and it's clear. Here, that's the same. Check it again, it's clear, and there too. So go on to Overlay, toggle Overlay, and the puddles still look great, but it's not causing impasse anymore. And keep doing this all the way until you are absolutely satisfied with it, and it will basically take you back to where I was before. Now, you should always be very aware of how much water you also have in a map. This is something that's been brought up a lot, and I won't finish this bit yet because there are other things to move on to, but if you go on to the water tap placement, have a look at your map and see how many water taps you have. Now, just from looking, I have one over here, I've got 3 there, and I've got 1 here. Any professional will tell you that you've got to be extremely careful with water taps. The idea with this is that every water tap creates and generates its own reflections. Each set of reflections has depth added to it, and has to compute the graphics for the sky, the reflections, the light, and the waves themselves. This is actually quite demanding on PCs. You'll generally come across a rule of thumb that you should have no more than 3 water taps per map. However, Relic does break their own rules sometimes, and some of their maps have more. Again, Hill 331, which I've used a lot, has about 5 or 6. The way that I can justify it is, I have 2 major water taps, so that's that one part of the river that's cut off by a land bridge, and you've got another one here. In fact, tell a lie, oh no, I don't, yeah, I do only have 2. I should have 1 for that part of river, 1 for that part of river, and 1 for this. But, being a cheeky little sod, I put in a channel at the back of the map that stops me from having to put 3 in. So it feeds 2. And that's going to be out of bounds, you'll never see that. The other ones, I've got to consider whether they're worth keeping or not. This one is a little lake, I like it there, so I probably wouldn't get rid of that. This one over here isn't entirely necessary. This is somewhere where I've got to put more mud and detail in. This is an old part of it really that needs to be worked on yet because the city hasn't been touched. But that's one that I'd consider getting rid of. And the one down here is what emphasises the swamp. I can't get rid of that. It wouldn't look like a marsh if I didn't have it there. But test it, give it some trial and error, and if you can, test it with friends who don't have a higher spec PC. Someone who's actually going to struggle to run Company of Heroes 2 sometimes, because the extra water taps will lag it more than anything else. I'll go on to lag in other things, other videos as well, especially when it comes to things like FX. There are fantastic ways to optimize a map to prevent lag in the simplest of occasions. At the beginning of the first video of this series, I showed exactly that by looking at splats. If you can remember, we went on to the splat list, I still have masses and masses of splats here when they might not be entirely necessary. If you come across an area that has more than 5 splats in one spot, it's probably not worth it. Like here, there's 3, maybe 4, but they're not all on top of each other, and that looks half decent. Whereas over towards here, that's only 1 still. This is getting more and more, but still they're quite spread out. This is where it starts getting a bit busier. This splat might not be necessary at all. It's only there just to kind of cover up the rest of the ruin. But whenever you start having more and more splats, it starts getting more and more demanding. Like here, I have 5 in one place, and I could argue that actually none of them are necessary. If I get rid of all of those, get tiles out, rubble chunky, feather to full, strength low, I could fill all of that in, and you'd be none the wiser. And it's such an easy way of optimizing a map so that it has less problems. You've got to consider that most of your audience is going to have a PC that can run this game, but the odd few might not. So, I think that might just about do us for now. I will go back next week and have a look at what the mud looks like around the entire map. I intend to get most of the mud finished. And for next week, I'm going to try and finish off this HQ side, this HQ side, which is going to need a lot of work. And then I will do a couple of videos on how to do proper ruins, how to do proper roadways, how to balance the use of splines and splats properly, especially in an urban area, which is easier than it looks, because here I've used things like roadways when they might not be entirely necessary. Then we'll go on to finishing off atmosphere settings, adding effects into the map itself, and just generally optimizing at the very end to make sure that everything runs smooth. So, this has been MonolithicBacon. Thanks a lot for watching. Go on over to kotu.org. There are some links in the description below. Have a look at some of my other works and the works of the people that I work with. And just generally keep having fun, keep mapping. And if you have any questions at all, drop me a comment or a personal message on kotu.org. And I'll see you next time.